What's the worst thing a teacher has done or said to you or someone else? Story 1. My glasses broke in 4th grade. It was manageable BC. I sat pretty close to the front. My teacher asked me several times when I was getting new ones, and all I could say was IDK. One day she moved me to the back of the room. Couldn't see the board from back there. She stopped saying what to do out loud and told us the problems we needed to do were on the board. Told the girl next to me she better not tell me what the board said. If I wanted to know my parents needed to get me new glasses, I'd try and sharpen my pencil or get a tissue or something so I could sneak a look. The girl next to me would write down what it said in the board and slip it to me. That way I know what math problems to do or what pages to read. I was 10. I couldn't force my parents to get me new glasses. Money was tight. She was an awful teacher. Once time, a girl slammed my fingers in a desk on purpose. She saw it and ignored it. I was a good kid. I never got in trouble and was always well behaved. IDK why she had it out for me. Story 2. In kindergarten, my teacher held a coloring competition. I took so much time using crayons to color within the lines. She looked at mine and called it scribble scrabble. I still resent that bitch 30 years later. Story 3. My teacher asked me if I was jealous of my older brother since he is such a great guy and so smart. It may seem small, but the tone of her voice was important. I had never realized people admired my brother in any way more than me. That was 30 years ago this year. I still think about it sometimes. It really hurt to hear someone describe me as the lesser sibling. Story 4. If you don't go outside and play with the other children, when you grow up, you'll be a cripple in a wheelchair. Said to me when I was 5. School starts young where I'm from. Because I had bad asthma, so I was reading in the library instead of running around. Fucked up on so many levels. Story 5. My school was really violent. I got slapped in the face in 1st grade by the teacher for mouthing off. I sure did afterward. Called her a bitch. Got sent to the principal's office. We had one teacher who had a paddle with screw tips that stuck out about a 1/4 inch. Same teacher would also make you put your head up against a concrete wall if you refused the screw tip paddle, so the regular paddle would hit you. Then you'd smash the top of your head into the wall. Your choice. One teacher slammed a student kidney first into the eraser shelf on the chalkboard. A principal, who was 6 and 7, picked a friend of mine, who was about 5'6" inches and 140 pounds, by the collar of his shirt and smashed his head repeatedly, 5 or 6 times, into the concrete wall above the door jamb. Lots of fighting in class, a stabbing or two, the occasional gun. Fun times in rural late 80s Ohio. Story 6. My math teacher senior year was talking shit about my friend, and how dumb she was to the other students in my class who didn't like the girl and were always picking on her. I stopped the teacher in the middle of the conversation and told her I was going to fight her on my last day of school, even if it meant I couldn't walk at graduation. She got pregnant right at the end of the year, so I obviously couldn't. Years later, the teacher's mother-in-law came into my place of work. She gave me her last name, and I asked if she knew the teacher, and her face went sour. I told her I hated her, and we bonded over how awful she was. Also, a history teacher choked a kid out in the hallway in that same high school. Story 7. Worst thing a teacher did to me was smash my dreams. I was in 4th grade, maybe, drawing, and my art teacher saw me and said, "Well, I know the one thing you'll never be is an architect." Guess what my dream job was at the time? Like, why the fuck would say that to a child? Story 8. Middle school English teacher, first day of Vlas. You are too young to have formed any worthwhile opinions. Therefore, you will keep your opinion to yourself. The persuasive writing unit was a sadistic psych ops aimed at destroying any iota of adolescent self-esteem. Story 9. Well, coming from experience. And this was horrifying to see as a kid. I had this 3rd grade teacher, right? Where I am from, you have one from 1st to 4th grade. Plus a few that teach you some languages, maybe, and IDK, sports teacher. But you have main one, right? Besides the fact that she used to beat the shit out of us, we had a bully, right? He was a bad kid. Well, one day she got some guys from the class and had them restrain him to a table and beat him, all of them. This image haunts me even now. No matter what that poor kid do, he didn't deserve this. He was just a kid. Some teachers are really fucked in the head. TLDR. Evil teacher restrained the bully to a table and had some guys beat him badly. No one deserves something like this, and it's a haunting memory. Not even a bully, he has to be taught, not beaten like WTF. Edit. 'Cause I believe this is important. She even became principal after. It sounds so bad and hard to believe, but I swear to God it's true. And she was a fucking bad principal too, looking down on kids. She had her own kid in that school too, and of course he was treated differently than others. It's fucked up, but it's true. Story 10. One of my teachers gave us a writing assignment on what it means to be Australian. I wasn't born here, so I asked, "What if we're not Australian?" Her response, "Well, maybe you should go back to where you came from," then went on a pretty racist rant about immigrants. I mentioned this during dinner that night. My dad called the principal to told him he's going to be at the school at 8:30 a.m. and to have my teacher in his office for a meeting. I got called into that meeting to give my side of the story. It was super awkward. My dad pretty much put my teacher in her place. She was fucking squirming. This teacher hated me from the get-go, but all of a sudden was asking all nice. I'm sure she was doing it out of interest and not because the principal was right in front of her. Story 11. I was a troubled teen, and I'd been in juvie, and I went back to my regular school where I had this teacher who hated me the whole time I was at the school. He'd already told me I was just going to end up in prison. But I was in his class, and he asked me a question, and I gave him some answer which I suppose was wrong, because then he said in this shitty tone, "Is that what they teach in juvie school?" So then I got up and walked out and went to the principal, and I was like, "Hey, juvenile proceedings are super confidential, and he's not actually legally allowed to say that." The principal was like, "Fuck, why do you know this stuff? LOL, damn teachers causing him damn problems." In case you're wondering, it wasn't just general talk is illegal. It was because the teacher had this information officially disclosed to him, and he cannot then disclose what he learned from that information. So yeah, asshat thing to say and illegal. My schedule got rearranged that same day, and then the teacher continued to glare at me until I left the school. Story 12. Not me, but a friend. A music teacher once told him music isn't supposed to be fun. My guy would go on to play in well-respected metal and indie bands in the 2000 ES. Nothing huge, but locally recognized, and did some international touring. He's a very talented guitar player and had lots of fun playing music. Fuck you, Miss James. Story 13. I was in 8th grade and putting on lip gloss while checking my compact mirror during dismissal. My teacher was in front of me and said, "What's the point? It's not helping." Not the worst thing ever, but it hurt my feelings and lowered my self-esteem a lot. Story 14. Boarding school teacher said my dorm looked like a pigsty. Junior high school math teacher said he should translate the questions for me. I was good at foreign language and not very good at math. Story 15. I was having a hard time in high school through my parents' divorce and was a bit of a rabble-rouser. This was a private school, so band shirts weren't allowed, but nobody there knew who Tool was, so I got away with wearing their shirt. My history teacher asked me in front of the class, "Hippie, does your shirt say Tool because in fact you are just a tool?" Story 16. My golf instructor called me a pervert in front of the whole class. I got up to use the bathroom, but the men's room was locked. So I knocked and then went and used an empty women's room. I was 9 years old and probably would have had an accident if I didn't go right away. But when I walked out of that women's bathroom, the teacher was right there outside the door to scream at me. He had security with him and made a big scene out of it. When we both went back to the group, he told the rest of the golf class that I was a pervert and liked to use the ladies' room so I could watch girls pee. Of course, everybody laughed. I was so embarrassed I told my parents I wasn't going back and to tell my grandfather I was sorry that I wasn't going to use the clubs or the lessons he bought me. I never told them why until my wife brought it up over a birthday dinner at their house a couple years ago. I'm over it now, but as a kid it bothered me for years. Story 17. The PE teacher at my high school got arrested right after lunch during my senior year because the principal found the sex tape she made with one of the girls on the volleyball team. The new band director gave me a 15-minute lecture in front of the entire band because I was goofing off during band camp. He gave us a 20-minute break, so I used it to talk to my friends while we're also in marching band with me. And when I started crying during his lecture, he said I deserved it for not being good enough. Then got mad at me for dropping out of band. Found out later that he was only mad because I was the only white trombone player. Previous band director would cuss me out and call me useless/worthless for being a foreigner. My family moved to a small town from the other side of the country when I was a kid, and even though a lot of locals love us, a few of them hate us for coming from so far away. History teacher would stand me up in front of the entire class whenever I answered a question wrong, and would encourage my classmates to laugh at me and make fun of me for being stupid. I'm good with history. I just had trouble learning the way she was teaching it. I'm better at learning when I can do it at my own pace and go down whatever rabbit holes I want. Science teacher got a 12-year-old pregnant, then tried to get her kicked out of school unless she got an abortion. Story 18. When I was in the 4th grade, I lost a paper and searched for it inside my desk. My teacher got really mad, picked up my desk and hurled it across the room. She made me miss lunch and pick up all my things. I was so afraid to go home and tell my parents because I felt like I'd done something bad. Eventually, they found out because other kids had gone home and told their parents what had happened. Story 19. A teacher in high school called a student a slut and a distraction to the boys. He told her that if she was raped or taken advantage of, that she was asking for it. He made her stand in front of his class with her hands to her side. He then took a ruler and measured the distance from the bottom of her skirt to her fingertips. It was half of an inch. The teacher then sent this girl to the principal's office and she stormed out in tears. Story 20. My third grade teacher, in the early 80s, cut my alligator shoelaces, apparently even though they were tied. The ends were too long and gave me detention. I cried. My dad, who had just left to live with his girlfriend, gave me those. And my mom was super depressed and hadn't gotten out of bed for 6 months. I, a third grader, had to feed my sister, in kindergarten, and figure out how to take care of the daily tasks. But, oh no, my laces were too long. God forbid you ask why I was filthy and starving. Fuck you, Mrs. Johnson, you backcountry shit teacher. Story 21. Well, there was the time in third grade I asked to go to the office because I felt sick and got told to sit down and be quiet. This happened several times, and at some point I fell asleep. When school was over, I blacked out while walking to the car. My temperature was 106.4. So almost killing me probably rates pretty high on worst thing. Then there was the time a single teacher decided to single me out as a troubled kid and found reasons to have me sent to the office or suspended over and over. Throughout my time in school, I was never suspended, removed from class, or sent to the office by another teacher. This one was responsible for me being suspended 50+ days that year. Bonus bit. Her husband was later murdered in a drug deal in which he was selling meth. Turns out my friend's dad knew him in college and dude had always been a drug dealer, but me, the kid with longer hair and a tendency to wear black, was somehow a problem to her. God, it's been ages and I still hate that woman. Story 22. Not as bad as some things I know, but it was pretty messed up when my 7th grade teacher berated me and told me I'd never amount to anything for the unforgivable sin of mislabeling an assignment that was late because I had mono. He was yelling in my face saying he knew my type, someone who worked their ass off to get homework done while still sick. I laughed it off at the time, but years later I realized I did stop trying as hard after that. Because why bother if I wasn't going to accomplish anything anyway? Story 23. I kept getting berated by my reading teacher for the shitty reasons, like my autism and undiagnosed dyslexia. I finally had enough, stole that bitch teacher's windbreaker, and threw it into some random yard across the street from the school. I also planted any items of hers into the desk of the teacher's pet, found out she had put her items there, and in return, the teacher's pet would get the highest grade from a random kid, often meant for me and others. Bitch teacher was exposed for she was, teacher's pet was expelled for cheating and stealing, and we finally got better teachers. Story 24. I was an extremely shy child with really low self-esteem. The one thing I was proud of or thought I had any talent in was art. When my very small school announced an after-school art club, I was very excited to sign up. There were a limited amount of openings, and the teacher announced students who were the most talented out of the sign-ups would be the ones selected to join the club. I was devastated when I wasn't picked, and it made me doubt myself for years. It wasn't until I was older that I realized that all the kids chosen for every after-school club, art, choir, etc., were conveniently teachers' kids. Teachers who would have needed after-school care for their children. It wasn't something that was done intentionally to me, but I'm still salty about how it made me feel for years afterward. Story 25. These are more on the mild side of things, but even as an adult, I think they're really odd to the point where I wouldn't trust their judgment generally. 7th grade, math teacher. He pulled me into an empty classroom and screamed at me for not being enthusiastic enough about math, actually yelling at me. It might have only been about 10 minutes of this, but it felt like much longer. I wasn't the kind of kid who acted up in class, despite my ADHD. While it's true I wasn't that enthusiastic about the subject, that was uncalled for at the very least. I can't recall if this was 7th or 8th grade, but my parents had recently gotten divorced, and my new Spanish teacher decided that my dad was the ultimate catch after meeting him at some school thing. She wouldn't stop asking me if he was dating and if I would introduce her. This was my 8th grade drama teacher, and it was one of my favorite subjects. He asked me to help him cast the middle school musical. I agreed, but later pulled out after it got really uncomfortable with my classmates for obvious reasons. He yelled at me for being flaky. I told him I didn't think it was ethical. At the end of the year, he gave out awards for the musical and literally gave one to every student but me. Fuck you, Mr. Hitzelberger.